So today we're going to go over the Palace Beautiful. We've seen Christian come up the hill. He gets to the lions. He gets past the lions, talks to the porter, and then last week we talked about prudence, piety, charity, and discretion, and the different characteristics of getting into the church. So now what we're going to do is talk about what happens when he's actually in the church. So remember, the Palace Beautiful is this picture of a biblical church. So what does that look like? What does a church look like in Bunyan's estimation? And this is, so what we're going to understand today is where Bunyan thinks what it's like to plug into a church, if you want to look at it that way. Okay, so we'll go ahead and jump in. Now I saw in my dream that thus they sat talking together until supper was ready. So when they had made ready, they sat down to eat. Now the table was furnished with fat things and with wine that was well refined, and all their talk at the table was about the Lord of the hill, as namely about what he had done and wherefore he did what he did and why he had builded that house. So they sit and they talk. So he's talking about what does a fellowship of the church look like? What does it look like for members of the church to interact with one another? And the first thing is they sat at a table furnished with fat things and with wine that was well refined. Now, what does that bring to mind?
Luxurious food.
Luxurious food. Mm-hmm. What else?
A steak.
It's true. Marbled. What else? Fat things.
Just affluence or something else.
Yeah.
Affluence, good.
Abundance of
Mm-hmm.
Symbolically, maybe good preaching and teaching.
Symbolically, almost good preaching and teaching. But if we think about it more symbolically, fat things. Do you guys remember what where fat things or the fat of the animal was used? Offerings, right? It was part of the offerings that you were given, and it was also considered part of the leftovers given to the priests. So the fat was the good part of the animal. We of course look at it, we want low fat this and that and everything else because we eat too much, and so we need to figure out a way to cut our calories. For them, that was calories. That was good stuff back in the Old Testament times. So they used to eat the fat. Okay, the fat things, and wine that was well refined. Now think about this. When they had weddings, remember what happened when Jesus turned the water into wine? And what was the complaint when they tasted the wine that he had just transformed?
Get the best for last.
Yeah.
People do the best first.
Yeah. And then once people are drunk, then you pull out the cheaper stuff that they can just keep going at it, right? So we're talking about fat things, things that are considered delicacies, things that were given to the priests and so on, and wine that was well refined. That was the best wine that they had. So do you see that the picture here is what you guys said, luxurious and full, but biblically we're also talking about things that were blessings, things that were treats, if you will. They were the best things. And so as these people sit down at the table, it's furnished, it's got all these great delicacies in front of them. And we're not talking about physical food, we're talking about the things that God has provided for the church. Does that make sense? So when we're looking at this, what they're enjoying is talking about the things of God. Those are the best things. Those are the things that this palace, these people are enjoying. Okay, the fat things, and they were well refined. So what was their talk about? Namely, what he had done, wherefore he did what he did, and why he had built that house. So three things: the things he's done, why he did the things that he did, and about this house. So let's talk about those a little bit more. So the first thing they talk about is what he had done. So what do you think that means? What are the things that God has done?
Their personal testimonies?
Personal testimonies would be one thing, for sure, right? How God has worked in you. How God has shown grace to you. Because we can all benefit from the fact that how he's shown it to you could be how he's shown it to me in some degree. And so I can learn from your testimony. I can see the blessings that he's given you, and I can also be blessed with the same, right? So that's one thing. What else? What's this?
one is cross.
What's that?
Christ's death.
Okay.
Kind of an obvious one.
True. What he did, right? What are the other testimonies in the Bible? Does Paul have a testimony? Does David have a testimony? Samson have a testimony? Right? So when we look at this, you're looking at partly what he did in how he works in you, but we're also talking about how he worked in other people. Can we learn something from Job? Can we learn something from David? Can we look at a Jacob or a Joseph and get something out of it? Are those our lives? Of course not. I don't think I'll be given up to be sold into Egypt and slavery into Egypt, but I guess, there's still a few years left, I suppose, in my life to find out. But the point being is I'm not going to go repeat that, but I can certainly learn something from it, right? And so that's what they talk about. When you walk into this church, the things that dominate conversation are the things about what God has done, how he's worked in you, how he's worked in me. What does the Bible say about different things? Now, they also talk about this, though. This is important. While they talk about what he's done in us, they also talk about why he did what he did. Now, why would that be important? Why is it important to understand why he did what he did?
What God did is history. Why he did it is his character.
Okay. Right? It has to do with his character.
It's a more personal question than just what he did.
I don't know if it's more personal. Because, what he did in you is plenty personal, right?
It establishes more of it's not just what he did, but it's the reasoning or his heart behind what
right.
he did as well.
Yeah. So if I were to summarize what you're saying, you're getting to see him more fully by reflecting on the things that he's done in you. Does that make sense? This is how we know him better. See, it's one thing to sit there and say, God bless me with this, God bless me with that, God's so good. Absolutely. It's when we stop and think about why he did it. The fact that he's doing it out of his goodness. The think about what he taught you in the situation. Does that make sense? It's one thing to acknowledge that you've been blessed. It's another thing to think about who has blessed you. Does that make sense? So that's really what they're talking about. Everything has a season. Everything has a reason. Everything that he does leads back to him. From him and to him and through him are all things. To God be the glory, right? That's the idea, is that when we stop and we not only say thank you for the blessings, but let me think about what I learned from this. Who are you? That's when we really start to get to the depth of the discussion. So this church, they love to talk about how you've been blessed and how God has blessed us, but then they like to take it that one step further and start talking about who blessed us and what do we get out of it. And then finally, the last thing they talk about then is why he had builded this house. Now, what do you think that means? The house being the palace beautiful. So what are they referring to? The first two topics kind of make sense. The last topic is a little harder.
The church, believers, the true church.
Yep. So they talk about why he built this house.
So what the purpose is of the church, the corporate gathering, why we...
Right. So what's the purpose of the church? Now, why would you talk about that on any regular basis?
There is no vision, people perish. And so if the church does not know what its purpose is, it will much more easily get lost in the field.
Good. So there's the idea of keeping it on track. What else?
It's one thing to talk about what God's done for you, us, but it's about how he is glorified through his church.
True. How is he glorified through the church? Because who is the church? Believers. Believers being what? Expand that definition. What are believers? Okay. And? What's that?
Those that love the Lord.
Those that love the Lord. Good. They're also the ones that he redeemed. The ones that he poured out his life for. The ones that they have a real value to him. So the question for the church then is, if God loves us enough to be able to make us into his redeemed people, then how do we treat all the other people in the church? How does that reflect upon us? Do we pour ourselves into this church in a way that goes beyond simply coming on a Sunday morning? Does it go beyond just simply talking about God and praying together? Does it go beyond just simply acknowledging each other's blessings? That's all important. But do we come to the church, the redeemed of God, and do we see a value to the redeemed of God? If God bought us with a price, do we have an equal valuation of God's people? Does that make sense? That's the question. So this church, when they sit down, they talk about what God has done, but then they also talk about what that means for the church. What does that mean for us? How does that affect us? What does that mean that we should go do? So we talk about how God's blessed us, but then we talk about how we're going to bless others through what God has blessed us with. Does that make sense? That's what they're trying to get at. So this biblical church is self-aware. They understand. They understand that they have to be not only acknowledge who God is, they have to acknowledge who we are. They have both the vertical and the horizontal component, and they're going out and they're doing it. Okay, and that's what we want to get out of it. That's what we want this church to be. We're not a social center. We're not a rec center. We're not just a big community center. We are the people of God. So we talk about who God is, and we talk about what that means in our lives. Okay? Right. And by what they said, I perceived, and this is going to be interesting, what this will form, and this is pretty cool, is it's like a mini confession of faith. This is kind of Bunyan's real quick nutshell. And the question that we're not going to go through each piece of it, but what we do want to understand is this, as people walk into the door of the church, is this what they get out of it? Okay? And by what they said, I perceived. This is by what they said. So what I heard them talking about as they conversed, this is what I got out of it. I perceived that he had been a great warrior and had fought with and slain him that had the power of death, but not without great danger to himself, which made me love him the more. For as they said, and as I believe, said Christian, he did it with a loss of much blood, and that which put glory of grace into all he did was that he did it out of pure love to his country. And besides, there were some of them of the household that said that he had been and spoke with him since he did die on the cross, and they have attested that they had it from his own lips, that he is such a lover of poor pilgrims that the like is not to be found from the east to the west. They, moreover, gave an instance of what they affirmed, and that was, he had stripped himself of his glory, that he might do this for the poor. And that they heard him say and affirm that he would not dwell in the mountain of Zion alone. They said, moreover, that he had made many pilgrims princes, though by nature they were beggars born, and their origin had been the dunghill. Okay, so some good stuff there. We're not going to go through all of it because we don't have time, but understand there's a couple of things we want to pull out. As they look at this, they say that he is a great warrior and had fought with and slain him that had the power of death. And then we read for later on that there were many pilgrims and they were beggars born. They had been set for the dunghill, and that he had to give up. He had to strip himself of his own clothing. Now, all those things should present a picture of a struggle, right? This church is not living in Pollyanna world where God's made everything great. They also don't live at the other extreme where the world is a terrible, dark place where nothing good could ever possibly come out of it, right? They are the people that understand that there is a backdrop of sin, that there is a darkness that dominates this world. At the same time, they also see that there is a light in this world and that he has given his heart, his soul, and his body for his people. Does that make sense? There's a very real understanding of the world. There's a tension between these two places that they acknowledge. And it's all Christ-centered, but it's not out of balance. Does that make sense? That's what's key about this. They understand who Jesus is in the world. This is what they understand. This is their holistic understanding of the world. They get where things are going. Second, they also understand that why he came was the love that he had for them. Okay? He did it out of love to his country. He died on the cross. People have talked to him since that he might. He did what he did for the poor, and he did what he did for people that didn't deserve it. Okay, is that making sense? And then finally, look at, and goes back to our idea of how do we understand this. What was the example that they used of how he loved his people? How did he love his people?
He voluntarily stripped himself of his glory
Mm-hmm.
and became like one of us, and then lifted us up from
Mm-hmm.
the dunghill to the
Good.
princes
Good.
with him.
So he willingly stripped himself of all his blessings to be able to exalt us up on that last day. Now let's go back to the last section. When they talked about how we are to act as a church, is there a connection between that and the church? What is that connection?
That we should consider others' needs above our own.
Right?
It's in Philippians where it talks about
Correct.
how we ought to be like Christ,
Right.
servants to each other.
Right. Philippians, we should empty ourselves, right? Become like him, who gave up everything for the good of the others. So what is that? That's called sacrificial love. That is love in a nutshell. Love that doesn't give anything up is not really love. Willingness to give yourself up. If there's a cost to love, you are willing to pay it. That's what demonstrates love. Not Valentine's Day cards, not candies, not big meals, not things that we really have. Right, Laura? We should just skip that. That's not real love. We should just, it's not Valentine's Day, right? So right, love is actually the sacrificial action. And that's what Jesus did. He demonstrates, so it says they affirmed, that he demonstrated the love that he has for his people by stripping himself of his rags and taking these people from nothing and giving them everything. He made them into princes. And the understanding is we need to take that as we go out into this world, as we go out to this church, we need to understand how we can love in the same way. Okay? Do we pour ourselves out? When we have a conflict and there's something that we don't really want to do we go ahead and do it, even though it costs us something, because we agree to do it, because we know that there's a need that needs to be met, and so we pour ourselves out to try to meet those needs. Okay, there's some good examples of that throughout the church. Now, the harder question, of course, is if somebody were to walk in the door and they were to listen to our conversation, is that what they hear? Would they gather these things from our church? When we're talking and having our conversations after church and everything else, and people were to overhear us, is that what they would get out of our conversation? Do we talk enough, I'm not talking about exclusively, but do we talk enough about these kind of things that's what visitors will get out of our church? Because that's what Bunyan's is explaining. This is what I heard. As I overheard, this is what I perceived. That's what he's trying to get at. Make sense? All right. Thus they discoursed together till late at night, and after they had committed themselves to the Lord for protection, they betook themselves to rest. The pilgrim they laid in a large upper chamber whose window opened toward the sun rising. The name of the chamber was Peace, where he slept till break of day. And then he awoke and saying, Where am I now? Is this the love and care of Jesus for the men of the pilgrims are, thus to provide that I should be forgiven and dwell already the next door to heaven? So the cool thing here is, when was the last time we saw Christians sleep? On the way up the hill, in the arbor. And the arbor was a very beautiful place as well. But what was the difference between the arbor and the Palace Beautiful?
Supposed to sleep at the arbor.
Yeah. While at the church, at the Palace Beautiful, he is, right? What does that tell you about? Yeah. Okay, that sounds bad. Don't sleep at church. That's not cool. Okay. In the palace, he's allowed to sleep. This is all allegorical, not literal, right? So as we think about what he was doing, he was able to rest in a chamber called Peace. So what is Bunyan trying to tell you about the church? It's a place of refuge. What else?
Place where you're refreshed.
Place where you're refreshed.
It should be a safe place.
Safe place. What does that mean to be safe?
That it's a place where you're not afraid to be able to confess sins and receive the same forgiveness from the people around you as you get from God. It's also safe from the devil's lies.
Right. So to a degree, we have to keep our guard up because we're always on track looking for wolves. Does that make sense? But the church itself should be a place where we can lay down. Because the problem with Christian falling asleep in the arbor was that, number one, he wasn't supposed to, and number two, he's out in the wild. He can be overcome with temptation. He can be overcome by Satan's lies and so on. So he can't fall asleep there. He has to be at the ready. Now, in the church, when he's here, what can he relax about? Well, he can relax about temptation. He shouldn't have to deal with gossip. He shouldn't have to deal with all these things. Now, does that mean that we're just free of them and we can go do whatever we want because it'll all just flow? Not necessarily. But the point is that I don't have to be wondering if this guy's out to get me. I don't have to wonder if they're going to tempt me to do something I'm not supposed to do. The women are going to be modestly dressed. The men are not going to be testosterone-prone, prideful chest bumping. I don't know if that really happens, but the point is that there's a kind of a beautiful holiness that pervades the church that allows me to lay down my weapons temporarily and relax. And that's what the church is to be. It is a place where we can get refreshed. It is a place where we can just lay down our weapons briefly and not have to worry about fighting temptation every day. Okay? And so he's able to lay down and rest in peace. Now, Christian says, that I should be forgiven and dwell already the next door to heaven. So what is Bunyan saying by that, with that expression? As he lays down in this church, he wakes up and says, this is like being next door to heaven. Because what is the church?
Small foretaste of heaven.
Right? What we should experience in the church is this imperfect but meaningful expression of heaven. It is God's people worshiping around God's throne, with the things of God being centered to us, with the people of God surrounding us, raising song to the Lord that we all love. What happens in heaven? Well, that. Right? Now, we're not perfect. Our bodies are breaking down. We all bring sin into it in some ways. We're all struggling. We can't help but notice what that person is doing and thinking, and I can't believe that happened to me, and I bring all these burdens and weights in from the world. So it's not heaven, but it has elements of heaven. It gives us a foretaste of heaven. And so when he rests, he's saying, this is what heaven's going to be like. And he's right. If church doesn't make you desire heaven, where we get to do this in glory, then there's something wrong with the church. Does that make sense? Second, if you don't like the church, you're not going to like heaven. That's the flip side. All right. So in the morning, they got up, and after some discourse, they told him that he should not depart till they had shown him the rarities of that place. Now, what do you think a rarity is?
Unusual.
Something unusual, something exciting, but keep going.
Special.
Okay. Rare. What makes something rare? Not meat.
Valuable.
Valuable.
Not common.
It's valuable because it's uncommon. Does that make sense? In other words, it's something that has that's special, that has a special value to it, but that value is because it's hard to find. It's rare. Okay, so this is a rarity. So they're going to show him some rarities. First, they had him into the study, where they showed him the records of the greatest antiquity. Okay, so that's history. Antiquity is history. So the first place they take him is, let's start educating you. In which, as I remember in my dream, they showed him first the pedigree of the Lord of the Hill, that he was the son of the Ancient of Days and came by that eternal generation. Here also was more fully recorded the acts that he had done, and the names of the many hundreds that he had taken into his service, and how he had placed them in such habitations that could neither by length of days nor decays of nature be dissolved. So what are they talking about? Who's the son of the Ancient of Days? Okay, that was easy, right? He's Jesus. Now, what do they talk about? They talk about the pedigree of him. What does that mean?
Lineage.
Huh?
His lineage.
His lineage and his position. His position. Who is he? Right? That's why they love the pedigree dog food. Right? The idea being you're high up. If you're low, your pedigree doesn't matter. So that's the idea. That's kind of implication. Pedigree. The pedigree of the Lord of the Hill, that he is exalted, that he is high up, that he was a son of the Ancient of Days. He's come by that eternal generation. He also has recorded the acts that he had done, the names of the many hundreds he had taken to service. And ready? And the places that he has placed them that cannot be dissolved. So they're reflecting on the fact that he's bringing people to heaven. He's got a place for them. Then they read to him, to Christian, some of the worthy acts that some of his servants had done, as how he had subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword out of weakness, were made strong, waxed valiant in fight, and turned to flight the armies of the aliens. All right, so what are those things? Where have you heard all those before? Hebrews 11. And Hebrews 11 takes that from Old Testament, right? So first they start with a knowledge of who Jesus is in the New Testament, and then they go back and start talking about, okay, now let's talk about the Old Testament. Because ultimately, how does Bunyan view the Old Testament and the New Testament? It's one gigantic story. It's one testimony of who God is. They don't conflict, they agree. Right? The New Testament being focused on Christ, the Old Testament also focused on Christ, but with a different flavor, I guess, if you want to call it that way. So the Old Testament explains who God is and who Jesus is through these different characters, through the people that had to shut the mouths of lions and so on. They all explain who God is, then Jesus comes as the perfect explanation. So they start with Jesus and they work their way backwards. So they talk about Adam and Eve, patriarchs, Israel, Job, Daniel, all those things are all listed in there. And through all these earthly events, they're brought to see who God is. Then we read again in another part of the records of the house where it was showed how willing their Lord was to receive any into his favor. Even any, though they in time past had offered great affronts to his person and proceedings. Here also were several other histories of many other famous things, all of which Christian had to view, as of things both ancient and modern, together with prophecies and predictions of things that have their certain accomplishment, both to the dread and amazement of enemies and the comfort and solace of pilgrims. So what does this church do when they take in a pilgrim? What's one of the first things they do? Teach them. Teach them what? Everything. They take their Bibles, they go from Genesis to Revelation, and everything in between is what they try to import into this pilgrim. That's what they see is chiefly needed for this pilgrim. Why would they start there? It is. How do you worship what you don't know? Now, does knowing create worship? Not necessarily, but it's impossible to worship what you don't know. So they start with the education, because once you have the education, now you got the foundation, they can start building it up, and they can start bringing it up, and that should cause you to see God more and more clearly. So that's what they desire. So they're going to start teaching you all throughout the entire Bible. There's nothing that was listed by Bunyan. There's no section of the Bible that's left untouched. It may not all happen in order from Genesis to Revelation, but they're going to touch every part of the Bible. There's nothing in there that they feel, Bunyan feels, is unnecessary. Make sense? All right. The next day they took him and had him into the armory, where they showed him all manner of furniture, which, remember, and furniture here is not necessarily like literally chairs. Furniture for them would be things that it's filled with. So remember, the table had furniture, which is a food. So this is, what are the stuff that's in the armory? All manner of furniture, which their Lord had provided for pilgrims, a sword, shield, helmet, breastplate, all prayer, and shoes that would not wear out. And there were here enough of this to harness out as many men for the service of the Lord, as there be stars in the heaven for a multitude. Now, this is kind of cool. First of all, do you guys recognize the sword, the shield, helmet, breastplate, all prayer, shoes? Where's that from? Ephesians 6. And what is it? The armor of God, which is what? Yeah, good point. That was circular. What is the armor of God for?
So that you can battle against like spiritual warfare. Good.
It's spiritual warfare, right? Not the things that we think of spiritual warfare, and I'm going to rebuke the devil. This is stuff that as we go into the world, what are the things that we need to be prepared to withstand temptation, to be able to glorify God, and to be able to grow and make it to the end of this journey. And that's essentially what the armor of God is for. Does that make sense? It's not to go fight the devil head on. The armor of God is for you to make it to the end of your journey and be able to be equipped with whatever comes your way. So we're not going out to look for things, but we are ready to fight it when it comes our way. Okay? So that's what they show them. They show them all these cool things that they say, be ready. So now we just talked about this education. Now why would we go to the armory next? What's the connection between the study and the armory?
Studying the application.
Which is essentially what the armor of God is. It's taking what God has taught you, those beautiful things that we've learned in doctrine, and now we're applying it and saying, this is what we're going to take out into the world. This is our armor of God. And so taking him from the study to the armory makes perfect sense. They also showed him some of the engines with which some of his servants had done wonderful things. They showed him Moses' rod. They showed him the hammer and nail with which Jael slew Sisera. The pitchers, trumpets, and lamps, too, with which Gibeon put to fight the armies of Midian. They showed him the ox's goad, wherewith Shamgar slew 600 men. They showed him also the jawbone, with which Samson did much mighty feats. They showed him, moreover, the sling and the stone with which David slew Goliath of Gath, and the sword also, with which their Lord will kill the man of sin in the day that he shall rise up to the prey. They showed him besides many excellent things with which Christian was much delighted, and this done he went to rest again. Okay, so all these different things, many of which I had to look up because I don't remember all of them either from my Old Testament. But a lot of them are in Judges, in case you're wondering. But as we look at that list, why are we going through them?
Individual Christian, and then you have how God has worked.
Good.
How he has used those.
Yep, so they're good examples for us. But what do those examples tell us?
Kind of like success stories, like how God has
Yeah.
used these individuals to overcome. It's the power that he's given them.
Right. Now what's the temptation, though?
If I pick up that weapon, I can be just as good.
The temptation is, I can't do it, they were them, right? Or I can be just as good as them. But here I've got the armor of God, I've got my education, I've got a bunch of examples. What do we see in these examples? Two things. How fancy were any of these guys? Samson was kind of impressive until they cut his hair. What do you know about Jael?
Nothing except that she used a hammer and a tent peg to kill.
And how exciting was Gibeon? Yeah. So as we look at these examples, how amazing are any of these men? How amazing is David? Why didn't Israel pick David as their first king? Because he was the last guy you'd expect, right? There was nothing impressive about him. So as we look at this, who are we looking at when we look at these examples? We're looking at this armor and saying, you're about to walk into battle, and now you're going to say, go take it on. You're going to go fight the devil and all of his minions with just this armor. Now let me show you some examples of who's done so and how they fared. And what do we look at when we look at these people? Well, they're not really great by themselves. If we look at the apostles, how many of the apostles were great men in and of themselves? How many of them argued with each other? How many of them, if you look at the scriptures, almost every time Jesus says, I have to go die, guess what the next response is? So, who gets the seat right next to you in heaven? I'm just wondering if I can sit there. So Jesus is talking about giving himself up for a sacrifice, and their immediate response is, oh boy, who gets to sit with you next to your throne? So who are they serving? So which of these men, of all the 12 apostles, is all that impressive? Thomas? James and John, the sons of thunder? Peter? Right? Forget the guys that you don't know anything about, the names that you just kind of list in there. They obviously didn't do anything important, right? So as we go through listing all these men, all the apostles, all the people that Bunyan's picking out, he picks out for a reason. Because they're all ordinary men, and these are all things that are available. Remember what he says, there's more than enough of this armor for everyone. which means everyone can go out to battle. There is nothing about you that has to be impressive. This armor is what makes you impressive. This armor is what gets you ready. Now, can you go out and battle? Absolutely. Look at the guys that did it. They were not impressive. You can go out and do this. Why? Because it's not you that's fighting. Let's look at this. When we look at a jawbone, how did Samson defeat all these people with a jawbone? No, it wasn't the jawbone, okay? If we look at Gibeon, how did he put all those people to flight? Where did he get the idea? Well, God gave him the idea. You see how all these men, rocks don't kill Goliath. God killed Goliath, and David was the instrument. So we see all these men, not only were they ordinary, they were extraordinary because of what God did through them. Does that make sense? So as we're looking at the armor of God, this isn't for you to think highly of you, to be able to think you are going to go wage a massive battle against Satan and hell. What this armor is for is to remind you that God is with you as you go out. He is going to strengthen you, and He is going to defeat your battles He's going to win your battles for you. And that's why we end with the man of sin will rise up, and the Lord will kill the man of sin on the last day. He won all my battles for me, and He's going to win my last battle in the end as well. Does that make sense? So the connection here, let me educate you, and hopefully that education makes you realize you're going to go to battle, and God is going to be with you. Just like He has been from the very beginning. Remember, Old Testament, New Testament agree. They're just different flavors of the same story. Okay? Michael?
I like the contrast that Bunyan uses. He's talking about how many sets of armor there are. Enough as there be stars in the heaven for the multitude.
Mm-hmm.
And so his period reader is going to be thinking, wow, this is a massive armory. They've got to have some really not just swords and shields, but some engines of war. Artillery. Yeah. And he says, let me show them the engines, which are a staff.
Yeah.
And so the period reader would be expecting cannons and catapults and
right.
Hey, look.
That's a good point. It's not our weapons of war, it's His. Yeah, He establishes the rules of the fight and the victory in the end. All right. Then I saw my dream that on the morrow he got up to go forward, but they desired him to stay till the next day also. Now, let's stop right there. I saw my dream that on the morrow Christian got up to go forward. Why did he get up to go forward?
He thought he was ready.
Yeah. Well, thanks guys, appreciate it. Time to move. Now, how does he make that decision?
It's of his own.
Oh, of his own volition. Notice how he does not ask any questions of, do you think I'm ready? He doesn't say, what do I really need to go on this journey? He just decides it's time to get moving. And what is his reasoning? It's his own. Are you picking up on what Christian's battle will be for the rest of this book? Where is he always going to trend? What I think, what I understand, what I think we ought to do, that's going to be his battle. The rest of this book, he's going to struggle with this. What happened at the arbor? This seems like a good place to rest. I think I'll do it. And now, the difference is, he's going to be one of the smartest, most biblical men you've ever met. And yet, what's he going to struggle with? The next to last story that we're going to read, guess what he's going to struggle with? His own understanding of the world, and relying on his own understanding of the world to the exclusion of all else. Here's how I see things, therefore, here's what I'm going to do. There's a big difference between here's how I understand things, what does God say about that, now how do I understand what I'm seeing? Okay? But right now, we're going to just keep developing that as we go. So he got up to go forward. They desired him to stay the next day. And then said they, we will, if the day be clear, show you the delectable mountains, which they said would yet further add to his comfort, because they were nearer the desired haven than the place where at present he was. So he consented and stayed. When the morning was up, they had him up to the top of the house and bid him to look south. As he did, and behold, at a great distance, he saw a most pleasant mountainous country, beautified with woods, vineyards, and fruits of all sorts, flowers also, with springs and fountains, very delectable to behold. Then he asked them the name of the country. They said it was Emmanuel's land, and it is as common, said they, as this hill is to and for all the pilgrims. And when thou comest there, from thence, said they, thou mayest see the gate of the celestial city, as the shepherds that live there will make appear. Now, there's a lot of description. It's very cool, and I don't know exactly why he said bid him to look south. I'm sure he had some reason for it. Maybe it's because it's in England and it's really cold there, and so he's thinking south is like closer to the equator, it's all warm and whatever. I honestly do not know. I'm sure he had something in his mind. But the point of this is this. He gets them up to the top of the hill. He gives them a telescope and says, look, see what's in the distance. Go look at the Delectable Mountains. And we'll talk about the Delectable Mountains in lesson like 30. And this is lesson 15. So just so you know, he's looking pretty far into the future. And he sees all these delicacies, all these great things that are going to be there, fountains and mountains and flowers and fruits and all this other stuff. So what do you think Bunyan's looking at? First of all, what is Christian looking at? What is Bunyan having Christian to look at as he looks into the distance? No, not the next place of rest. That's a good idea. It is a place of rest, not necessarily the next one. So you're right, because you see all these delicacies. Just like he's enjoying now, he's got there, okay? But where is it? A long ways away, which means what? What does he have to do in between?
Journey a long way.
It's got a journey. So what is he looking at? The future, and how far into the future? Way in the future. So what do they want him to do? Persevere. And how are they getting him to persevere? They want him. How many of you spend any length of your day thinking about what it means to get old? How many of you think about what it means to die? What is it going to be like? Where am I going to be at that time? What do I want to see out of it? Where is God going to be when I sit on my deathbed? How many of us spend any time thinking about it? Besides Wayne. In between all the text messages.
Probably not that many, but I think sometimes if you're going through a period of your life where you're having to deal with death, either because of
Death of a loved
family,
one.
loved ones that, in my case, a lot of my family is a lot older. I was kind of young, so there's been every few years or periodically there's been a lot of that. So you keep getting revisited. It's like, oh yeah,
Right.
but otherwise normally you wouldn't.
No, you're right. Normally you wouldn't. And when we're on a race, so I used to run track, and one of the surest ways that you would slow down was, what do you think the easiest way was to slow down? No. Nobody died on the track. I mean, I guess that would slow you down. That's true, but it wasn't where I was going. As you're running the race, assuming you're still of good health, what was a typical way of slowing down?
People pass you and you don't think you can make it. You're so far ahead, you go back.
When you start to forget about everything else around you and you start focusing on the track right in front of you. And now you have no way of measuring your speed. You have no way of knowing exactly how far, where I should be going, how fast I should be going. I tried it once when I ran cross country. I'm just going to go my own pace, however I think is comfortable. And so I started running, and I didn't care who passed me or whatever else. I just started running. And then about a mile into the race, it's a 3-mile race. About a mile into the race, I started looking around, and I realized that I was in dead last. Absolute last place. I actually literally looked behind me and didn't see anyone behind me. And I'm like, I can't do that. And so for the rest of the race, I just started sprinting and passing as many people as I could. It was complete pride. But the point being is that I just did not want to be last. And I didn't know I was last until I started looking around. And so I started realizing where I was in regards to this race and how fast I really should be running. And so what this church wants Christian to do is not only go put on the armor, not fight the battles that are right in front of me, not deal with the things that God brings in my life today, is to keep in mind what God's going to do in the end. It's to start anticipating where I'm going. It's not an excuse to say, I don't have to deal with this now because Jesus is going to take care of me in the end. I still have to deal with today. But I don't deal with today in a vacuum. I deal with today by looking at the end. I need to consider my death day. I need to consider, not morbidly, but I do need to be aware of that the God today is going to be the same God then. And that's got to give me some motivation, some excitement, something that tells me I need to keep going. This God is going to be with me today, and He's going to be with me in the end. When I'm old and gray, Lord willing, and I'm sitting there with grandkids running around, then God's going to be the same. The same God that's feeding me right here in this palace, the same place that I'm at right now, feeling like I'm almost in heaven, is the same God that's going to feed me then, and I can feel that much closer to heaven at that moment. I'm looking at the delectable mountains. I'm looking at the gate of the celestial city. I'm so close, I can taste it. I need to be remembering that. Do we spend any time looking forward to that? Or are we so stuck in today? Are we so stuck with all the challenges and the blessings of today that maybe that's kind of in the distance? God can wait. Heaven can wait. I've got too much to do right now. Right? And that cuts both ways. It could be because you're too busy. It could be because you're enjoying life. There's nothing wrong with that. But do we spend some time just considering who God is? What is it going to be like on that day? Right? And that's where it's older saints. And it's so important to not go to a church that's all millennials. Okay? For a number of reasons. But the current reason is if you go to a church that's predominantly young, that's kind of cool, but it's also a problem. Because the older saints are the ones that are going to give a sobriety. They're describing what it's like to get closer, to be able to think about their actual death day. To Alistair Begg, at his church, they had a lady there that had a terminal illness, and she actually wrote out what she wanted at her funeral. For some of you, I know you're going to want to have a funeral. I don't really want one. But if you do, then here's what I want. I don't want an open casket. I want this song, and I want that song. And she explained out what she wanted at this service because as she decided, this is what I want people to remember about me. This is what I want to happen. I want there to be songs. I want there to be this hymn. I want this to be that. Right? She was really thinking about what it would mean to die. Because it's realistic. We are born to die. And that death is either to judgment or to heaven. And you have two things possible. Now, if you are a believer and you know that heaven is just waiting for you, there should be anticipation. That should be exciting. It shouldn't be morbid. There should be a degree of adrenaline that comes with thinking this life ends, the next life begins. It's harder when you're younger. It's really hard when you're a parent because there's too many things right now going on that I can't think of. I don't have time to think of heaven. I've got too many things right now, right? And when you're younger, you think it's never going to happen. But that's not really the point. It will happen. One day you will be on your deathbed. Period. Or do you look forward to that day? Do you think about it at all? And again, I'm not talking about the morbid, psychology kind of issue, psychoanalysis kind of thing. Do you look forward to the day when you're on the cusp of going into heaven, when God is becoming that much more real, when things are almost tangible? And do you get excited? Do you get excited? Okay? And we're going to talk about all that when we get there, because Christian's going to go through all this. But the point now is, at the beginning of his journey, he's looking forward to the end of his journey. Okay? And he's going to keep doing that as he goes. There are going to be times where God's going to faithfully remember where he's going. And they're going to get these visions every once in a while. He's going to go up on a hill and be able to look at a distance. And then when he gets to the delectable mountains, they're going to give him his telescope and say, look, do you see the celestial city from here? Okay, and they're going to be through things. So Spurgeon said, depend upon it, your dying hour will be the best hour you have ever known. Your last moment will be your richest moment. Better than the day of your birth will be the day of your death. It shall be the beginning of heaven, the rising of a sun that shall go no more down forever. C.S. Lewis, has this world been so kind to you that you should leave it with regret? There are better things ahead than any we leave behind. All right, now, so let's finish this up real quick. Now he bethought himself of setting forward, and they were willing he should. Good. But first, said they, let us again go into the armory. So they did. And when they came there, they harnessed him from head to foot with what was of proof, lest perhaps he should meet with assaults in the way. He being therefore thus accoutred, walked out with his friends to the gate, and there he asked the porter if he saw any pilgrims pass by. Now, so they come out, and then now they say, all right, now you're going to go into the world. So now we're going to get you ready with the armor of God. So they actually put on the armor of God on him. He comes out, and now he's ready, right? Not the armor of, remember, that was a big difference, right? Is Goliath went to battle, and he had God on his side. Saul went to battle in his own armor, with all the stuff that he said, here, David, why don't you use my armor? Because that's what he thought. It was his strength that he was trying to give him. This church, as they're getting this pilgrim ready to go, they're giving him the armor of God. They're preparing him with the things that God has given him. Okay, so there's a big difference between, hey, here's a series of gospel tracts, here's all the stuff that we want you to be aware of, here's the tax laws and how to make sure you get your tax deduction. That's not what they're talking about. This is the stuff of God that they want him to go out into the world with as he goes out to battle. Now, as he comes out, he talks to the porter. Did you see anyone pass by? Porter says, yes. Pray, did you know him? His name was Faithful. I wish that was my name. Oh, said Christian, I know him. He is my townsman, my near neighbor. He comes from the place where I was born. How far do you think he may go before he has got by this time below the hill? Well, said Christian, good porter, the Lord be with thee. And add to all the blessings, add to all thy blessings must increase for the kindness that thou hast showed to me. So he sees a Christian leaving this beautiful place. He's thankful for it. He's just in love with it, but it's time to move on. Awesome. Okay, so we're going to keep going from there. One last idea. Faithful went by. What did Faithful not do? He didn't stop. Now, why is that a problem? Which means he's not very prepared, right? He decided not to stop and join this biblical church. So what's the difference between Christian and faithful? Preparedness. What's the similarity between Christian and faithful, if you had to guess by his name? They're still part of the faith. So what is Bunyan trying to tell us? As Christian sees, this is the fellowship that God has brought into his life. What could be the possible issue?
He could feel superior to faithful because of his teaching.
Yeah, there could be a problem with the teaching. Christian could feel better, faithful might feel a little worse. It could also be that they don't see things the same way. Faithful obviously didn't think the palace beautiful was important enough to stop in. Does that make it kind of hard for you? And yet, think about this. When Bunyan was thrown into prison, he wasn't the only guy there. There was a whole bunch of other nonconformist preachers that were also thrown in prison because they had similar convictions. But chances are, they all did not have the exact same doctrinal positions on everything in the Bible. And yet here's Bunyan sitting in prison. Is he not going to talk to anyone else in prison because they don't see things exactly as he sees them? What do you think Bunyan learned quite clearly as he's sitting in this prison with all these other nonconformist preachers that are all in there for the same reason? You know what? Maybe the definition of belief doesn't mean the same doctrinal standing. It just means a heart for the Lord. And if I can have fellowship with another believer, that means not sitting there saying, do you agree with me on every point of doctrine? Otherwise, we can't have fellowship. We just heard a joke, I wish I could remember it, but a guy is about to commit suicide, and the other guy comes to him and says, what are you doing? You have so much to live for. And the guy says, I don't know, what do you have? He goes, aren't you a Christian? Yes, I'm a Christian. Wow, me too. Wait, are you a Baptist? Yeah, I'm a Baptist. Oh my gosh, so am I. I'm a Baptist. Wow, that's great. Do you believe in this confession? Me too. Oh my gosh, that's so awesome. And they go through it, and he keeps going through, and finally he goes, wait, do you believe in the Reformed Baptist Confession of 1529 or the Reformed Baptist Confession of 1614? And they go, I'm a 1614. He goes, oh my gosh, you heretic. And he pushes him off the side. Right? And so you start to realize just what we divide ourselves upon. And yet here's Faithful, who doesn't stop at this church, which may be an issue. He may be immature. He's not as prepared as Christian, and yet he's still faithful. He doesn't see the world like Christian. He didn't go to the same church. They have doctrinal differences, but they both love the Lord. And so here's the fellowship that God has brought into Christian's life. Can Christian have fellowship with someone that doesn't see the world like he is? Or is the only person that Christian can have fellowship with a clone? Is the only person that you can see talking to things about God, the only person you can talk to are your wife and your children, because they're the only people that will accept you for your positions? Or can you disagree and yet still love? There's a big difference.